All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to unpack a really powerful idea, a lesson that comes from, of all places, a Roman prison. It's all about finding purpose, even when you feel completely trapped.
Yeah, I know, it sounds kind of backward, right? But that's the big question at the heart of our story today. We're going to explore how one person's imprisonment actually became the very thing that helped his message spread even further.
So, to really get this, our story doesn't actually start in the prison cell. Nope. It starts with the people on the outside, specifically, a community of believers in the city of Philippi who were just consumed with anxiety. Imagine this. News gets back to the Philippian church that their leader, the Apostle Paul, has been arrested and thrown in prison. You can just feel their hearts drop, right? For them, this wasn't just bad news. It felt like a total disaster, the end of the mission. And look, you can't blame them for worrying. I mean, from a practical standpoint, Paul's work just hit a brick wall. He couldn't travel anymore, he couldn't stand up and preach in public, no more visiting synagogues or starting new communities. So you see, their conclusion makes total sense. Based on everything they could see, the main guy, the engine of their whole movement, was basically out of the picture, locked up, silenced. But then, a letter shows up. It's from Paul, and what's inside is going to completely flip their understanding of the situation on its head. So you gotta wonder, what was Paul thinking? Was he in despair, just like them? Did he see this whole thing as a massive failure? Well, the answer is probably not what you'd expect. Get this. Paul writes back and tells his worried friends that his being in prison, his chains, his confinement, his apparent defeat, has actually helped the message spread more. How in the world is that possible? This is where we get to the core idea. Paul was seeing things differently. The source material calls it Pangratian Rohani, which we can think of as spiritual understanding. It's this incredible ability to see your circumstances not just for what they are on the surface, but from a divine perspective. It's about reframing challenges, seeing them not as roadblocks but as opportunities. And here's a perfect example of what that looks like in practice. For Paul, where other people saw prison bars, he saw a captive audience. I mean, literally, the Roman guards chained to him, they weren't his jailers. They were people who had no choice but to listen to what he had to say, all day, every day. His prison cell became his new stage. And this way of thinking, this perspective, it didn't just stay with Paul. It created this huge ripple effect that went way beyond his prison walls. Think about it. When the other believers heard that Paul was still being bold even while in chains, it didn't scare them off. Just the opposite. It fired them up. They probably thought, hey, if Paul can do that in prison, what's our excuse out here? It gave them this huge boost of courage to speak up without being afraid. But, it's never quite that simple, is it? The story gets a little more complicated here, because not everyone who was inspired to act had the best intentions. So you basically had two groups pop up. On one hand, you had these, let's call them selfish workers. They saw the main man, Paul, on the sidelines and thought, aha, here's my chance to get some attention. They were driven by envy, by ambition. But then you had the faithful workers. They were coming from a totally different place, motivated by love. Seeing him suffer didn't make them want to grab the spotlight. It made them want to work even harder. This whole situation is just such a powerful, maybe a little sad example of a really old insight into human nature. Centuries before Paul, the prophet Jeremiah wrote, "The heart is deceitful above all things." And here we see it, right? Even in a community built around faith, that selfish part of us can still show up. Okay, so what does this story from an ancient prison cell mean for us today? I mean, what's the lesson here? Well, it's actually incredibly relevant. The big takeaway is this. Sometimes the things we immediately label as bad can actually bring about something good, even if we can't see it right away. A setback at work, a personal struggle, a huge disappointment. Paul's story is a reminder that these things can be opportunities in disguise. Our first reaction isn't always the whole story. And that leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. Paul had this spiritual understanding. He had such a deep trust in his purpose that not even a prison cell could shake him. So the question for us is, how can we develop that same kind of deep trust? How can we learn to look past our own prison bars, whatever they may be, and find our own captive audience?